Oh, welcome everyone to our Fox and Raven Bones, a virtual fireside storytelling. Hmm. It is said that whenever a story is told, and the telling is with a certain kind of way, with a particular kind of intention, that it becomes night, and a fire becomes kindled. The trees, they lean in a little closer, listening in to the stories and the conversations. The white moon seems to pause her journey across the starry sky. And even the mountains and glacial rivers, they fall quiet to listen in. We bring to you these storytelling events, the old bardic fashions, that we may gather together as a village. And we may draw from these mythic tales from around the world and draw from them the symbology and the mythic representations within them and how they may be relevant to our own times. Because when we look at our human language, we can see that it is limited, doesn't have the full capacity to really express the consciousness and the dreamings and the full context of our experiences. And that is why storytelling is one of the oldest human traditions. That way of stirring the remembrances of what your soul already knows. It's a way for it to begin to have voice, those inner tremblings of your being, that it can come to the surface and have its own seat at the council fire. See, storytelling has long been a way we enter a certain kind of mind that allows us to really enter into these deeper meanings of our experiences in the present landscape that we are navigating, both in the world and within ourselves. It's long been a way these greater mythic symbology and patterns may present themselves and reveal to us so we can step into today with a little more clarity and a little more strength. So today we come to a story from Scotland. And the story is the slaying of the cloud dragon. And I wasn't able to find the actual author or much of the history of this. All I know is that it has come from Scotland. And I first came encountered with this story in a book called Dancing with Trees by Alison Galbraith and Alita J. Willis. And so from this story, we're going to dive into it. And this is what we do as reflective storytelling. And what that means is as you're listening to the story, really feel into these characters. There's the dragon, there's a king, there's a young girl, there's two different goddesses, there's a forest, there's a landscape. And feel into where those might be representing in your own life. Whether it's the landscape of your family, the larger landscape of these pandemic times, or what have you. And then after the storytelling, we're going to reflect in on these patterns and these mythic representations and how they really are expressing themselves so we can walk into our day with a little more clarity and a little more strength, feeling a little more sense of what we can do to navigate these times. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and dive into the story. Once upon a time, a very long time ago, Scotland was ruled by two goddesses, Bridie and Biera. Now, although they were sisters, They couldn't have been more different. See, Bridie, she had this long blonde hair and bronze, sun-kissed skin. And she smiled wherever she went. When Bridie ruled the land, all the people, they were happy. Now, Biera, on the other hand, she was as ugly as her sister was beautiful. Her skin was mottled blue, and her hair, this tangled snarl of purple and browns with debris clinging into it. And her one eye, which was set in the middle of her forehead, it glowed red. And when Biera ruled, the weather, it turned foul. Sleet and snow trailed after her, and howling winds twined about her knobbly legs. And when she arrived, people, they hid inside their wooden houses, and food became scarce. The people's faces became long and drawn and tired. See, back then, most of Scotland was covered in trees. And from this forest, the people depended for their food and their shelter. They collected nuts and fruits from the woods to feed themselves and their animals. They cut down the trees to build their simple round houses. They were humble folk. And they hunted the deer that lived in the woods for food. And in the winter, they collected branches off the forest floor to make fires to warm their homes and cook their meals. Now, when Breda ruled, the trees would unfurl their leaves, blossoms bloomed, and the fruit ripened. The deer would grow plump, and food was plentiful. So the people were happy, and they loved Breda for her generosity. So they sang and they danced her praises. But they never celebrated Breda. They never celebrated when Breda was around, and as the years passed, Breda's jealousy of her sister grew. Now, Breda and Breda, see, they had an agreement. When one was ruling, the other had to stay on an island far, far to the west. And on one summer's day, Breda sat in her island, exiled, gazing into the dark pools of water around her island, watching morosely as the people of Scotland held yet another party in honor of her sister. And as she looked on, Breda had an idea. See, she was not allowed to go to Scotland until Brady's turn was over, but there was no rule against sending someone else over. And she knew just the perfect someone to do so. So Breda, she summoned a ferocious dragon to the island, and she whispered her plan into his huge golden ear. Then she conjured up an enormous cloud and hid him in the middle of it. And she watched eagerly as dragon and cloud flew swiftly towards Scotland. Now, as the huge dark cloud settled over the land, blocking out the sun, people stopped smiling. Then, as giant balls of fire began to fall from the cloud, setting ablaze everything it hit, people ran to hide in their homes. The fire burned down the pine trees, destroyed fruit bushes and nut trees, and chased away the deer. Slowly, but certainly Scotland's beautiful forest was being destroyed. What were the people to do? The cloud showed no sign of moving. So the king, he called all of his best hunters and all the warriors to a meeting. There's a dragon in that cloud, he told them, and our beloved forest is not safe until the beast is slain. The warriors all gathered together and they threw their spears into the clouds, but they couldn't see the dragon inside, so their weapons missed their mark. The archers shot their arrows into the cloud, but they too failed to hit their mark. And fire continued to fall from the sky. The people began to despair. There was no more dancing. There was no more singing. Their faces were long with worry. And the king, he called a meeting of all the wisest men and all the wisest women from across the land. And they talked for days and days, but not one of them could tell him how to get rid of the dragon. Now, all the while, fire rained down, burning up everything in its path, and the people feared there would be no trees left. Now, a young girl, a peasant girl from the village, she approached the castle gates where there were 2 guards, and she asked to meet the king. And she says, I know how to get rid of the dragon. And the guards, well, they laughed at her. How can you, little girl, solve a problem that has baffled the wisest elders and the fiercest warriors? And the young peasant girl says, well, I know. And if you let me, I will tell the king. So they said, okay, we will let you through. Please come and tell the king what you may know. So the girl walked up the steep steps up to the great castle's doors, and she opened them with a huge creaking of sounds. And she stepped into the great forum, the great hall. And as the young girl approached and walked through those chambers, her stomach churned. Her stomach churned as all the people, all their eyes fell upon the girl, watching her walk up towards the king. She felt afraid. But the king smiled kindly to her, and he waved her forward. And she went up to him. She walked right up to the king and went up right up to his ear. And she whispered in his king's ear. And the king, he listened into what she was whispering, and he nodded thoughtfully, and then he smiled. Next thing, he sent his best archers and warriors to the top of the highest hills. Then he sent messengers to every corner of the kingdom, ordering that the people to take the baby animals away from their mothers. They were to take the lambs from the ewes, the fowls from their mares, the calves from the cows, the kids from their nanny goats, the chicks from the hens, and the ducklings from the ducks. Even human babies were to be taken away from their human mothers. And as the babies were taken away from their mothers, what do you think happened? They began to cry. Lambs and kids bleated, fowls neighed, chicks peeped, calves mooed, ducklings quacked, and the babies wailed. High up in the sky, hidden inside that cloud, the dragon heard the growing din. Now he considered himself to be the most terrifying beast in the world, yet in all his long days, of murdering and destroying, he had never managed to make someone sound as miserable as the creatures of this land sounded. And as he listened to the cries, the dragon began to feel afraid. He began to imagine that there must be something larger, more ferocious, more terrifying than himself down below. But he couldn't think of any other reason why everyone would be making such a fuss. What if that terrifying something came after him? If only he could see what was down there. But he couldn't see through the cloud to the ground below any better than the people down below could see him. So slowly, cautiously, the dragon swooped towards the bottom of the cloud. Slowly, cautiously, he stuck his head out of the cloud. He couldn't see anything terrifying, but still the wailing continued. So he slipped out a bit further. Now, as soon as the dragon's chest was visible, the warriors hurled their spears and the hunters loosened their arrows. The weapons found their mark, and the dragon fell down from the sky, down from the clouds, down from the fiery heavens, down to the ground with a thump. And when he did, the cloud melted away. And as the cloud melted away and the dragon was there dead on the earthen floor, the people came out of their huts and their homes. And they smiled. They began to sing and celebrate and dance again. Their precious forest had been saved. And that is the story of slaying the cloud dragon. Oh. All right. So there's a lot packed into that story there. Hmm. Hmm. So much in that story that we can unpack and make very relevant to our times. Everything from the relationship between the two goddesses and the relationship the people had with the goddesses to who's the king, what the king represents, and the young girl. The shooting of arrows and spears into the cloud, but not quite seeing where they were going. Right? The idea that the dragon had to poke its head out cautiously, slowly. Yeah. Right? To the celebrations of the people. Now, originally, the reason I chose this story was because of the relationship between Piera and Brady, right? And really the relationship that people had with each of those. Because you can see how when we're in the season of summer, and everything's blooming and everything's light, we have more light in our day, right? People are happy, they celebrate spring, they celebrate summer. But we find we don't often celebrate winter. We don't celebrate those cold, dark, long, dark days. Right? We don't really celebrate those. Now, in Ayurvedic medicine, the reason I really first chose this, and there's a lot of things we're going to unpack in this story, but we show that we each have our own personal hoop cycles. Right? We have our times when we feel really aligned and connected and balanced, spiritual. And then we have our times when we feel kind of agitated, like, man, we feel aggressive. We have to conquer life. right? We have to conquer our dreams and put ourselves into action. And then we have these times when we just feel unmotivated. We each have these times when we move and we're feeling really motivated and inspired, and then somehow we feel like we lost all that motivation. And we feel heavy, we feel deflated, we feel uninspired. Many even feel depressed during this time. And we often fight against that. When we look at ourselves, and if we come from this nature perspective, and when we look at like Ayurvedic medicine, Chinese medicine, like these most oldest traditional medicines in the world that are still practiced today because of how effective they are. Now they share we're a part of nature. And that just like, the summer falls into fall and comes into winter, and then begins to emerge and expand into spring and then summer again. Well, we have our own personal cycle. And it's likely you think about it, right? You can become aware of your own personal cycle. And you can see how in this story, we're always happy when we're in happy, right? When we're celebrating our sattva, right? That's the summertime. But we often fight against the winter. But what is winter? Winter is the time of rest. Winter is the time we come close in for storytelling. Winter is the time that we nourish ourselves and be with community. In the shamanic tradition, it's the time we call the season of shadows. So we work with our shadows, our unprocessed wounds, our regrets, our stories, our beliefs, and we work our way through that so that when the spring comes, we feel that sense of emergence coming. And then we can blossom anew with the new gifts we've harvested from those shadows. And I picked this story to highlight that element where we often are trying to put on a mask and say, I always want it to be summer. I always want it to be in the state of flow. And we don't celebrate and honor the time when we feel heavy. But if you allow that time to come into rest, just like the earth withdraws its energy back into the earth, coming back into the dreaming lodge. That's what we call it, the dreaming lodge of Bear. If you come close in that way, there's many gifts there for you. And in these times, these pandemic times, there's a lot of emotion out there. There's a lot of unprocessed anger and grief and sadness and fear. And so when we come into those heavy times of our cycle, we find it's important to rest and honor them. And if you do, you will emerge with gifts. And we'll go deeper into that in another story we're going to share called The Dreaming Lodge of Bear. Now, when we come to the landscape of our current times, we can see that when the dragon came over, it was hidden in a cloud. We couldn't see it, right? We couldn't see it. And that wreaked havoc, that dragon, right? When we think about what was the dragon, it was the accumulation of unrest that was happening with Pura. Not because of her sister, but because of the relationship the people had with that cycle of the season. They were always trying to celebrate, right? Breeding. And so when you don't give something a voice, and you don't honor something that is already a part of us, right? That resentment, that something ferments there and it builds and builds and builds until it can't be contained anymore, then it lashes out. How often do you or you observe this? We all observe it. I'm sure we all experience it. Where things build up into our side of ourselves, we don't give it voice. And then suddenly we just lash out. Whether it's anger or we build up with our grief, we're holding on this grief and all this emotion, all of a sudden, it just flows. Right, so the dragon is the accumulation of something, and then it's sent over. Now, what does the dragon actually attack? It's very interesting. It doesn't actually attack the village. It doesn't attack the village. The dragon attacked the forest. And what is the forest? The forest is the systems that are actually sustaining the people. It's where they get their food. It's where they get their shelter, right? It's where they get the food to feed their animals that the animals can then provide them. So the dragon's actually attacking the systems that sustains the people. And without the forest, the people would not be able to sustain. So we think about today's landscapes. We're in this time, right? These pandemic times. And our system has broken, right? That which is sustaining us, right? And the ways we sustain the forest is broken. It's in flames. We can't go to work, right? Even some of the where we get our produce, our meats and foods, they're no longer able to produce those for us, right? So there's a dragon coming in and attacking the systems here. What that dragon is in the global aspect of things or your local aspect of things in this pandemic, the virus. And so we have this virus, which is the dragon, right? And then we come to this point where there's the king. And so the king, what does the king represent? Across cultures, the king represents the sense of nobility of self. Our own nobility, that which knows between right and wrong, that which is trying to do the good things. So the king is meant to represent the nobility of soul. And that's what the king normally represents in these old mythic tales, particularly from Europe. And the king doesn't know what to do. And so he brings out his hunters, right, which are the providers of the village. And he brings out the warriors, which are the protectors when the king is a noble king. And they're also the instigators when the king is a tyrant, right? But in this case, it was a noble king. So he brought out those who are the gatherers, right? The providers, and those who are the protectors, and says, there's a dragon in that cloud that we cannot see, and it's attacking our systems that is sustaining us. But they couldn't see the dragon, so they were just shooting their arrows and throwing their spears, but not quite sure where. And so they missed their mark. Right, so you can see in today's era, there's a lot of people shooting arrows and throwing spears and putting blame at different people and different systems and different ideas, from conspiracy theories to even, what is the right protocol? Do we wear a mask? Do we not wear a mask? Is there really even a threat? Doctors saying there's only a 0.003% of us even getting it and dying. And then there's other reports of nurses are dying. And so there's all these arrows and spears being thrown about. And when you can see that when we're in a place of fear, we don't have the clarity to know right sight. And we're listening. He called the king. He called all those experts, all the wise women, and all the wise men. But everyone could not come up with the answer. So he was calling all these experts. But suddenly here comes this young peasant girl. And what does the young girl represent? Innocence. It represents intuition. She represents that one thing, that one part of us, she represents that which hasn't become complicated and hijacked by the complexities of our own adulthood. And in that time, and in that innocence, they have this ability to go straight to the truth. How often have you heard a child just say point blank something very profound, and you're like, right. And they hold you accountable. They call you out, not with the intention of calling you out, but they have that innocence that they can do that. And so this young girl, she approaches the gates, and there's the two guards. Right? So you have your own nobility of self, and we have these guards that are protecting what kind of information comes in. And here's this young girl, and they're like, Who's this young girl? And they even laugh at her. But something that's important in this story is that these guards, these protectors that allow that to come in towards the king, they acknowledged her and they allowed her to pass. Even though they laughed, they allowed her to pass. Imagine the courage of this young girl, young peasant girl, walking up the steps to this great castle, opening those huge doors into this great hall, people probably dressed in fine clothes, dignitaries, diplomats, wise men, wizards. And she was nervous, but she had that courage to still walk forward. And she got strength when the king looked at her kindly. He looked at her kindly. She walked right up to the king. She didn't apologetically share. She didn't even ask permission to share. She just walked up to the king, right up to his ear. And she whispered into it, right? Kind of similar to how Biera, right, the ugly sister, whispered into the golden ear of the dragon. But here we have innocence, whispering into the nobility of soul. And she knew what to do because she had the idea. She's like, I'm scared of this dragon. I'm scared of it killing the forest and probably her forest friends, the deers, the rabbits, the squirrels. And then in her innocence, she thought, I bet that dragon is scared of something too. I bet that dragon is scared of something too. It's a very wise thought, isn't it? And she thought of what would create that kind of fear. So when we think back on our own life, we're here in this time, right, when there's this uncertainty of the land. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how to stop the dragon, the virus, right, the pandemic, the COVID. And we have all these experts, and they're not coming up with any solutions, at least at the time of this story. And so we have to ask, we could ask, like, well, what is that virus afraid of? But maybe the better question is to realize how the dragon isn't actually the problem. The dragon isn't the source of the conflict with the people. It's actually Biera. Biera is the source of the conflict. The dragon is just a messenger. It's really the people's relationship with Biera, right? Those darker aspects, those other elements of life that we're not paying attention to, that's culminating and building and building and building until eventually can't, and it's being sent over, and it's coming in the form of COVID. I'm not here to say what Biera might be for us or might be for you, right? We can say if we can help heal that relationship with that unknown part, that part we're not truly honoring, that part that we're not truly respecting, if we can heal that relationship, there's not going to be other dragons. Now we could think about some of the things that are coming close in. Like we're seeing that the system that we have at play that sustains us is actually very fragile. Right? We are losing work. The economy is basically crashing. Right? How long will our farmers be able to keep food coming? And so we can see that what will sustain us is if we come back towards that place of innocence, we can see that it's really the people closest to us that are going to help us sustain. Like, what are the quality of the relationships that we have with people? Your local farmers, your local people who raise the meat. How can you bring and honor in the elders of your life? In your own neighborhood, do you know your neighbor? What kind of relationship do you have with your neighbor? When we can come in and start creating these ecosystems just within a few blocks of ourselves, we'll see that we can each show up for each other despite how our system, the fragility of our larger system, if it crumbles or if there's uncertainty, we can know we can come close in with each other, right? So the solution isn't necessarily on slaying the dragon, right? We want to handle the dragon, but we also want to come close in with the source. And so you may say, like, with your king or your queen, their sense of nobility, are you directing your resources, right? Your hunters and your warriors, where are you firing those weapons? Do you have a clear vision of where you're actually firing towards? You can also think, what is your relationship with those other parts that maybe is sending that dragon over? And I don't just mean COVID. I imagine in this time you're seeing where you have damaged relationships in your life and where you have healthy ones. What are some that you might want to really nourish? What are some other systems that are around you that you may nourish? In permaculture, we say, you nourish what you love so that what you love can nourish you. When we look at indigenous systems, they knew, you want to tend to the herds, you want to tend to the land because that's what sustains us. So we love into that, we feed that because then it can grow. Where in your life right now can you feed something to grow so that what that is can help sustain you, right? So these are some of those reflections of this story, and there's so many more we can go into. And I would love to hear, like, what comes up with you, what questions are surfacing for you in your mind and your heart. And please email me at learning@treeoftotems.com. I would greatly love to know your own personal reflections of who's the dragon in your life, or who's Biora, right? The the dark goddess, you can say. Right? Who's the innocent one? Are you letting your own innocence come in, that childhood intuition come in and really have a voice? Are you blocking her at the gates? What our ecosystem that's sustaining you, is that on fire? And how might we come close in with our friends and our family and our community to create a more stable system? Lots of great questions. Again, so email me at learning@treeoftotems.com. And if you need support during this time, we're offering free pandemic mentoring sessions to help you navigate these times, whether it's your fear, anxiety, or you just want to draw out more of the mythic meanings in the landscape that you are navigating, whether that's the external landscape or your internal one. We are here to help tend to the village and bring back the village culture. We're bringing back the elders. We're bringing back the spirited of the youth, honoring life transitions and stages throughout our life. We're trying to bring back this model of what it means to live in togetherness, and in that have this stability that will sustain us no matter what happens. So you can learn more at treeoftotems.com. And in the meantime, happy journeys. Please email me. Love to hear your feedback. Okay. Home.